Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you all for coming. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, like I say, for folks coming in, please, there's a bunch of seats in the middle. Feel free to kind of like climb across people to grab a seat. I don't want to see you all standing. That's not comfortable for me or you. Who's having a good DevOps Belgium? About 20% of people. I'm really sorry for Stefan. He's not going to be happy with that. Who's having a good DevOps Belgium? That's better. 50% is good. I'll stop there. So today's session is about Spec Driven Development and why your prompt chaos won't scale. As a show of hands, and there's a big light in my face here. As a show of hands, who's using any kind of developer AI dev tool today? Hey, awesome. Who's keep your hand up if it is only either ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot. Okay, that's good to see. So the vast majority of you are using a number of different tools other than the kind of classics. And in today's session, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to start off with, I guess, how coding agents have changed over, I was going to say over time, but realistically, we're talking about a couple of years here, right? And think about how we are using prompts with our AI assistants today to build software. And there are pros and cons to that, and I'll talk through that. But mostly talk about the problems of prompts, the limitations that prompts give us in our software development process, and then take a look at how spec-driven development or spec-assisted development can help with both of those. We are going to be doing a lot of demos today with AI, and I'm sure it's going to be nice and deterministic and nicely playful, so fingers crossed. Okay, we're going to start with AI assistants and agents. An AI assistant being something which is more talkative, more of a chat-based flow, whereby I offer short prompts, it offers me a response, and it does small amounts of tasks. There is more synchronous blocking behavior that we're talking about. It's far less autonomous compared to an agent, which may do multiple things over a longer amount of time, potentially calling out to other agents or other services, MCP servers and other things as well. So they're more kind of like the bigger, longer, we expect more from them as well. When did ChatGPT first hit the scene? A few years ago, right? When it did, we all rushed into ChatGPT, seeing what it could really do, copy-pasting code from our wonderful, private code bases, sharing it to all the training data out there, and then we were, identifying what it could do. Sometimes it did the right thing, sometimes it didn't. We actually didn't care too much because it was absolutely magic when we first saw it. But of course, that copy-pasting back and from the browser, I'm sure we all did this, right? Copy-pasting back and from the browser to our IDE, it became a pain. It wasn't part of our developer workflow until Copilot came along, and Copilot was really kind of like the first mainstream tool that really helped inject a lot of that into our IDE workflows. And Copilot, very simply, initially, was kind of like a little bit like tab complete, but based on things like our comments or our intent. I was expecting sometimes for it to tab complete my comments or tab complete my variable naming. Sadly, it didn't do quite as good a job at that. But the idea is I add some context and it understands what I'm doing and adapts the code, typically in this case as an assistant in small chunks. That's all very, very well and good, but then we wanted more, and we thought, okay, what's next? How do I make bigger changes to my code base? And of course, everyone thought, right, I can write an agent, I can write a plugin, I can write something which can help you do this. And there was a huge number of assistants and tools and models that were launched from this. I'm going to show you a few now. I'm going to show you Cursor, Claude Code, and Bolt.new before we look at where potentially prompts are holding us back. Who's tried Cursor in the room today? Okay, not many. Interesting. Who's tried Claude Code? A fair number, more than Cursor, interestingly. Who's tried Bolt.new? Interesting, not many at all. Okay, I'll talk through a few of these, and we're going to actually do some playing around with each of these. We'll try and build a couple of little apps to see what happens. The first one I'm going to do is Cursor. Now, Cursor, the way they decided to deploy this or to deliver this is as not just not a VS Code extension, but as a VS Code fork. So this is their fork of VS Code. And here I have an existing application. What I might want to do, rather than get that kind of code assistance where as I'm typing a comment or as I'm typing something, I get some suggestion as to what I might add as my next line, what I can do here is I can use this chat on the right-hand side. It used to be called the composer many moons ago. Now it's just the chat, and here I can say, can you perform this new function, add this new function, debug this thing for me? And it'll go through my entire project. I can specify specific context if I want, but in this case, it will make changes to multiple files. In this case, this is a SimCity ripoff called Tiny Town Simulator implementation, which I might say, please, and also always use please and thank yous with an agent, because we don't know quite what the future will bring. We say, please create a new building in building type. Okay. Now, there's a lot of thought that goes into it in these days with these types of chats. Very often some planning, very often trying to work out what it needs to do before it does it, and then it goes through those various tasks. So in this case, it does a bunch of reading. We can see that plan that was created, and it goes through that. It can now make changes to any file it wishes in this environment, and we can see we're already updating the index.tx, a game reducer.tx, and the key piece of this is me as a user, I'm still in the IDE. I'm looking at the code, and we'll take a look at Bolt in just a second as to how that differs. But at the end of this, I'm going to have the choice to look at the code, to review the code, and to accept the code. And that'll be happening any second now. Oh no, it's found an issue. So this is one of those other things where we jump into some loops every now and then. Sometimes it fixes something, it breaks something, maybe that's part of the fix, maybe it's a little bit of collateral damage, and it will cycle round. Sometimes these cycles last 7 to 8 years, sometimes it's just a number of minutes. Hopefully in this case it will just be a short period. But it sees the issue, it fixes the issue, it updates, goes through the to-do list, and it looks like it's just updating that last file. I'll hang on here just because I want to show you the code review changes, and actually what I'll do is I'll go and show you Bolt as an example. Bolt is quite different. It's similar in the sense that we write a prompt, and as an agent, it goes away and does a bunch of stuff. But I feel, as a developer, I feel far less in contact, far less close to my code. I might create something, create an app, and in this case, they're typically very good with like web apps and things like that. I might say, please create a DevOps session rating app. Now, what it's going to do, in fact, the DevOps app, by the way, if people didn't know, I think Stefan mentioned it earlier, was actually vibe coded by Stefan, Spec Driven vibe coding as well. But what Bolt's going to go away and do now is it's taking my single, very, very simple request. It's going to go away. It's going to pretty much YOLO build this entire web app for a DevOps rating system. That can take a fair bit longer, but I'm actually quite comfortable as a disposable app just to go and leave that doing that. It's thinking, it's got another task list very similar to, as you'll see, many of the others, but I'm going to leave that for a while and come back. Okay, it wants to run some stuff. I'll just say skip. It's telling me what it's built. This is actually a pretty neat way of looking at it as well, because for people who don't want to particularly review the actual code changes, they can see visually what it's done. I can now look at this. I can see the files that have been changed. In this case, there are 5 of them. I can review the changes. And of course, I can blindly keep all as I would, because I'm a very bad developer. Right. So this is Cursor, very in tune with the code, multiple file changes. You need, as a good developer, to identify what it's changing, make sure it's a reasonable change, and then accept, decline, update. I'll leave Bolt. That's going to go for a little while. Okay. Let's move over to Claude Code. Lots of people using Claude Code. This is Claude Code version 2, which is now using Sonnet 4.5. I'm going to, at this point, this is a terminal UI. Terminal UIs are all the rage. If you look at a bunch of these types of these new agents, Google have got Gemini CLI, OpenAI have got, what have they got? Codex, thank you very much. We have Claude Code. There's a number of these. Here, it's a terminal UI, so everything happens at the terminal. It can evoke everything nicely in Bash and things like that. I don't really get to see my code that much other than some of the diffs, but it's not that IDE experience. In here, I might say, create a tic-tac-toe game, so CLI game. It's going to flow. It does lots of wonderful verbs that it uses here, but it essentially does very similar things. It creates a task list, a plan list. It then starts executing through that. It requires me to give it various permissions per session, and then I allow or decline, depending on what it's trying to do. I can add various things. Make sure you color, yes, create that. Make sure you color code. Yes, UK English, the game. It queues that message up, and at a reasonable point, it will add that in. So as you'll see in just a second, yeah, sure, do that. Now it's added the make sure you color code the game. It will at some point add that in. So it's a very interactive thing, but it's running there asynchronously, and it will come back to me every now and then. But it can kind of like, so long as it has all the permissions, I can kind of leave it and come back. I'll just say yes to everything because I'm a terrible security person. Let's see if Bolt, yeah, Bolt's still going. Okay. This is Claude Code. Very, very cool. It's vibe coding right now. I will see some of the code as it flashes by like that. That's absolutely fine. It adds color to the game. It can test it here, maybe locally. It doesn't necessarily create tests unless I ask it to create tests. But it's super cool. If you haven't played with this, and I've talked to so many people who have very, very highly regulated jobs and can't use these types of things. If you do have a chance to play with something like this, start with Claude Code. This is an amazing, amazing tool. Okay, that's what we have that I'm showing you from a prompting point of view. Maybe we'll come back to Bolt. DevOps is still on tomorrow, right? Come back at midday tomorrow, and we'll take a look at this tomorrow. Okay, so what happened after everything was launched then? We at Test-as-Guardrails do a bunch of work in and around code generation and things like that. And so we have an AI engineering team that have done a lot of prompt engineering. And I'm just going to pull, there's a whole session actually that we can give on prompt engineering, but I'm just going to provide you with 3 that I think are actually really interesting that maybe not a large number of people know about. One of the first ones, which is super interesting, is that when that prompt gets sent to the LLM, did you know that before that LLM finishes reading that full prompt, it's already started deciding on building that answer for you? Okay? Really, really interesting in that it's almost like a kid. If I say, go upstairs, and then I'm just about to say, but the kid's already halfway up the stairs, and his slippers are left down here, and everything else, right? LLMs are essentially children. The second thing is about the anatomy of a prompt, and really, the way we have really found good prompts to work, particularly as they get longer, is to segment parts of that prompt. And in this case, we may get booze here, but we tend to use, it's not full XML, but it's the XML notation. So we're able to categorize to say, this is the provided materials, this is the markdown specification, this is the ecosystem requirements, and it allows the LLM to recognize where the start and end of various sections are, and it's very easy to also refer to previous and next sections as well. And the third tip that we want to talk about is something called task framing. And this also leans into the idea of constraints. Here we have a pretty large prompt that is asking for a JavaScript package, and it's asking for a particular app that we want to create. And at the end, we add a constraint. Okay? And that constraint is do not use any external packages. So we don't want third-party dependencies. However, as you learned from the previous couple of slides about how LLMs start building their answer before they finish the end of the prompt, very often by the time it's going to actually get to that point, it's already thinking and it's already narrowing down an answer to a plenty of solutions that it's got in its training data, which very, very likely and possibly rightly uses a third-party dependency to do this for it. So as a result, when we run this prompt many, many times, virtually all the time we will get a JavaScript package back that does use a third-party library, even despite the fact that we very clearly add a constraint. We beg for it not to use external dependencies. What we want to do is something called task framing, which is rather than add a constraint at the end, first of all, add it to the front, and secondly, describe it in more of a positive way than a don't do this. So instead of saying don't use third-party dependencies, what we really want to say is write a self-contained JavaScript package. Okay? And by saying that, it's first of all very upfront, so the LLM reads it straight away. And secondly, we're encapsulating the constraint as part of our request. Okay? So 3 nice little tips there. But there are a ton of agent prompting pitfalls. What could they be? I actually, yesterday in the hotel room, I was kind of like asking ChatGPT to rate itself and to say, what are the biggest problems you have? It felt very much like a counseling session with ChatGPT. But the biggest problems that ChatGPT, or that AI agents have, is when I ask it, and loads of people have probably seen a lot of these. I'll do a show of hands at the end for people who have hit these problems. I write a prompt and I say, do this thing. It does that thing, 5 other things break. Okay? It's the collateral damage because it's focused so much on the thing I'm asking for, it's not caring about the other things. So fixes that cause collateral damage. The second one is forgetful agents. Oh no, I forgot the image on this one. No, I didn't. Forgetful agents. So we have here, it's like when we ask in a context window a whole bunch of things, I'm going to ask it 10, 20, 30 requests as separate prompts. On that 30th request, I might say, oh, you've done the 30th request, but now you've actually undone the 20th, the 15th, and the 6th, right? It's about when it does something, it almost forgets about some of the other things, or it holds them with a lesser priority and doesn't mind if it undoes those to satisfy your latest request. A third one, oh my gosh, hallucinations. I'm sure everyone's seen a hallucination. Essentially, trying to be very creative, expecting something to be there, making things up. In this case, very often, APIs. And another example of that is actually where maybe it's not making up an API, maybe it's just assuming you're on a version from its training data that actually has a different version of the API to the one that you're actually using. So it could be very valid for that specific package, but just not at that version. So the version blur is perhaps where you're using version 1.1, there's a new edition in 1.2, and the agent is assuming you're on version 1.2, and so trying to call that against 1.1, and we get problems. Stale training data. Spring, how many Spring developers do we have here? Hey, whole load. Spring 7 coming out in November. Everyone excited for that? We have one Spring super fan. I love that. Okay, so Spring 7 coming out. What are the chances of any agent knowing how to code against Spring 7 in November when its training data was in January 2025? Even Sonnet 4.5, the training data is from January 2025. There's no chance. Okay, so it's about stale training data when we try and use library versions that are beyond the date of the training data. And of course, lack of persistent knowledge. I spent ages in my Claude Code environment saying, oh, do this, do that, do it this way though. This is the way I like to develop. And then I close that, or my computer crashes or whatever. I start it back up, and it goes, hello, as if it's a completely new agent, and I have to retrain it all together. So there's a number of problems here that we could see. And every single time there is a problem, we get this, and it's so smug and so angry, so happy, but it makes me so angry. And this doesn't happen once, okay? Because we spiral. We try again and again and again, and very often the agent is trying its best to give us the right answer, but it doesn't have the information it needs to actually give us the most accurate answer. So it says, you're absolutely right, I'll go and do that 5 minutes later. You're absolutely right, I'll go and do that 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. I will genuinely throw my laptop out the window after an hour's worth of spinning and spinning and spinning and getting to this stage. Honestly, if a person came up to me and said, you're absolutely right, I can't be accountable for my actions. And it will probably be an American, right? You're absolutely right. So, Ben's in the crowd somewhere, aren't you, Ben? So what we want to do is make our agents more accurate, more predictable, more current with what we're trying to code against. But most importantly, provide real validation that what it is generating is what we actually want to push to production, something that we trust, believe is good. Can this really be done the way we're doing this with vibe coding, with prompts? At Tessel, we don't think so, and I'll talk to you a little bit about Tessel in a minute, where we talk a little bit about specs, but we don't think so. We don't think we can do this just with prompts, and it's quite easy to get over-fixated with these loops and trying to prompt our way out of a paper bag, really. And we don't want to. The solution, we believe, is not to focus on these short-lived, disposable prompts, but to think about it in a much more longer-lived way. To think about it in a spec way, where we can be more accurate in our definition, where the agent has everything it needs every single time, irrespective of the session. So, oh yes, and no more. No, I'm not even going to say it. So, what is one of the biggest issues that we have with the way we develop software today? Well, code, and I'm sure everyone with absolute persistence will say, I always add my feature updates, my bug updates, everything back into my PRD. And it's always up to date with my code. It always holds my intent. Well, for the majority of us, the PRD gets stale very, very quickly. And actually what happens is the code becomes that source of truth. If there is a bug, I don't go to my PRD, I go to my code, because my code is what is running in production, and that's the absolute truth. However, the code couples the how and the what and the how. The what is my intent, what I actually want to deliver, what I want my code to be able to deliver in functionally. The how is how I actually went about delivering that in code, the decisions I made as part of the implementation of that intent. In this case, we have two pieces of JavaScript, TypeScript, I don't know. And it's coloring a button. Okay, there are two different ways. One uses kind of like an inheritance style. One actually puts it more directly in the code. Why do we do this? How do we do this? When this was done 6 months ago, what were the decisions that were being made? Is this something that is important? Is it just an implementation detail that can be changed? It's very, very hard to extract intent from code versus just a decision, a throwaway, disposable decision that can be changed from code. Specs, on the other hand, care far more about the intent, and they care far less about how something is implemented. They contain all the decisions, or they should contain all the decisions that we want implemented by a system, by an LLM. Now, in this case, specification is just a plain text file, which is in Markdown format. We can add a number of things in here, and I'll talk through a spec in more detail. But essentially, a list of capabilities, things I want my application to be able to do. And this specification is a description of my application. It's a functional description, kind of like a PRD, but in Markdown, that an LLM can consume. This is quite low level. This is a functional description of that. I could actually go higher as well, and I can say, well, I want specs that describe my company goals, that describe my organizational goals, and different levels of specs that an LLM can use contextually to make certain decisions. But of course, specs don't just have to define an app. Specs could be used as context. Specs could be used as knowledge for an LLM. It's really important to provide not just good prompts, but very, very good context at the right time. Not to under-deliver context, but certainly not to over-deliver context. There's this Goldilocks zone where there's this just right amount of context where LLMs can be very, very powerful. Now, specifications could, in this case, with this React example, define how to use a specific library. That is very, very useful for LLMs that are trying to use that library at a specific version. Maybe there is some example code there that we could use for the LLM to almost copy or use. There could be not even about the application or about the third-party libraries. It could be some style guidance. As my organization, I want to write code like this. I don't want to use these types of things. I might say, I like spaces, not tabs. But that would be because I'm a maniac. Tabs for the win. It could also be best practices. It could be cursor rules. There could be loads of things that could be described in specs. And it's all about using that to guide, to put an agent on rails so that they can deliver the best output we wish. So let's use some specifications. And in this case, I'm going to be using Tessel. In this case, I'm going to be using Tessel. And if I come here, so what is Tessel? Well, no, don't do a software update during that. There we go. Where am I? I need to go here. So what is Tessel? So Tessel is an organization that is trying to stand up to this challenge of how we think about specifications as first-class citizens, how we deliver AI-native software, whereby if we was to rethink the software workflow, how do we build AI into the base of that? How do we consider that a first-class citizen? And we really settled on specifications as a core piece that will define actually the next paradigm of how we build software. There are different ways in which we can use it, though. We can use specifications in more of an AI-assisted manner or spec-assisted manner, and there's also more of a spec-driven or spec-centric manner, and we'll talk about both of those. Now, the first case, I'm going to use Claude Code, and I'm going to create an application. It's going to be, I guess, vibe-coded in the sense of I'm not going to be using specs to define my app, but what I want to do is I want to give my agent the best chance of using the third-party libraries it chooses to use in the best way. And I want it to make sure it's using the correct libraries or coding against the correct libraries, making the right assumptions when it does that, and using the best practices about going about using those APIs. So here I am. Let me just double-check I'm logged out. You don't need to use it. By the way, this is an open beta. You don't have to be logged in. You can run it in an anonymous way as well. I'm going to create a. No, I'm going to run. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to run tests-as-init first. I've downloaded the tests CLI already, and what I want to do is I want to prime my agent that I'm going to be using Claude Code here, and I'm going to prime it so that it knows about certain things which we call usage specs, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But I want to prime it so that it knows about Spec Driven Development, it knows that it can use these specifications to help it build code, and it's going to know about this thing called a spec registry. The spec registry is as it says, a registry that holds these things which we call usage specs, and a usage spec is a full description about how I can use a specific library at a specific version. So for example, if I want to use, I don't know, the node commander CLI, I would use the node commander CLI, use the node commander library at a certain version. I would check the registry to see if that usage spec at that version for that package existed. I could download that, and then as a result, I could use that as part of my development with my agent because my agent can use it as context. So I'm going to run tests-as-init, and tests-as-init will ask me if I want to use an AI agent, which yes, I do. I want to run it in Claude Code, and I want to use the MCP server. So now, when I run Claude, yes, I want to use my MCP. At this stage, if I run /MCP, you'll see I've got Tessel there, and if I look at the tools, I can both search for usage specs and install usage specs. So for my development, I have tools that are available in Claude Code that will allow me to download these usage specs, these markdown specs, that fully describe how I can use third-party libraries in my development. And this guides the agent to be able to do that. So let's create an application. So I'll say create a CLI app that sums dice rolls given a dice notation, i.e. 1d6. I'll say use Tessel specs, Tessel usage specs, just in case. I don't need to do this because there's enough information in the agent's MD file through the tests-as-init that tells it what usage specs are, what spec-driven development is, so that it should do this automatically. But this is a demo, and I know there are demo gremlins around, and so I want it to be absolutely explicit. So in this case, it is using the Commander library. It's also using Node.js. It wants to search, so it's going to use Tessel at this point to search for those usage specs so that it can pull them down locally on the file system, and the agent can use it to code against those. So I'll say yes, and don't ask me again. It's normally no and don't ask me again, isn't it? OK, now it wants to install them. I'll say yes as well, and I'll tell you about the difference. The searching for a usage spec is simply looking at the spec registry and saying, do you have any specs that look or sound like this string that I'm going to pass you? You will get a number of usage specs back, and it will say, yes, I've got 20 of these. Which one would you like? Then we will try and identify which is the most reasonable one to pick based on the most reasonable version that we're using, and so forth. Once we pick them, we need to install them. And to install them, we just download them onto our local file system. And you can look at them. They're just plain markdown, plain text files, and you will see a list of capabilities, a list of maybe examples and things like that. So if I was to look at this now, right now, it's reviewing the commander docs. So it's actually, there's a task which is going ahead now, and the prompt is, I need to build a CLI application for dice rolling. Please review the commander.js documentation. It's looking at the usage specs, and it's doing this because of the prompts that we gave it earlier. It recognizes where they are, it reads them, and it tries to understand what from those usage docs are relevant information for this task. And then it will provide that as part of the, as part of the context. That was all done in a sub-agent. Okay, so we're not butchering all of the context that the main agent has. The sub-agent runs in a separate context. It reads all of that, it summarizes just what's needed, and then it passes that back to the main agent. That's how we sit and continue to stay in that Goldilocks zone of not too much, not too little context for the LLM to work nicely. So in this case, it gives me some suggested configuration, some structure, all those kinds of things. Option resolution orders, and all of this will hopefully provide now with a good application. In the interest of time, I'm going to jump to another demo. And this demo is now going to be a demo in which we're using specifications as really the center part of our application. So before, I was talking about spec-assisted development. We are still developing with an agent. It's still building, writing code, creating code directly. The code is still the source of truth. But I'm assisting the agent with usage specs. I'm giving it context that will help it build that. What I'm going to do now is something which you could call Spec Driven Development, you could call Spec-centric development. The core of my universe now will be a specification. The thing I want to create, the thing I want to update and edit will be a markdown specification that from there I want to create things like docs and things like tests and things like code. So I'm going to Tessel log in, because this is something that does need an account. This is, by the way, in there it is. That logs me in, perfect. This is in a closed beta, but I will actually put up a QR code where you can all access it directly, but just don't tell anyone in Tessel, otherwise I'll get into trouble. This allows me now, when I run Tessel init, it'll provide, and I'll do exactly the same with Claude Code, it'll provide more information now about creating the spec, about full spec-driven development, so that now when I run Claude, and I'll say, yes, use the Tessel MCP, and I go to the Tessel MCP tools, you'll see this time I have 12 new tools where I can create, document, edit, tests, run parallel, as well as my usage spec work there as well. So now if I come out, and let's say I'm going to do something like create a CLI hangman spec, spec, that'll do. Use Tessel. Oh, let's not use Tessel specs. Let's see if it can do it itself. So this time it's coalescing. Let's see what that does. So this time around, it reads the knowledge straight away. So it's trying to work out if it has interesting knowledge about that. It recognizes it needs to be bootstrapped. When I create an app, the worst thing you can do is just make assumptions. And so what we're doing is we're asking, this is Tessel prompting Claude to ask us, we're prompting us, how do you want to develop this? So I'll say, no, I'll just say, make your own decisions for once in your life. Sometimes I write make reasonable decisions as if it kind of knows what reasonable decisions are, but make your own decisions. Okay, it's gone with Node.js. That's not a reasonable decision, Claude, but I'll live with it. It's going to do an npm install. It'll continue. Once it gets enough information, it's actually going to pile a lot of this into the agent's MD. It's going to do an npm install again. And it's going to install Vitest. So it's using a test framework. And one of the big pieces of this is when and as we write specifications, we want to be able to validate them. And the way we validate specifications is by creating a strong test harness whereby we can run tests, deterministically run tests against the code that is generated to make sure that that code is aligned with my specification, so that the decisions I've made are being held by my code. So a couple of things that it has done, it's playing around with multiple things, including my package.json, which is fine, some various configs, a TS config, and I think a Vitess config. It wants to edit the package.json again. I'll let it. I don't care too much about Node. I don't mind. So it's going ahead and doing that. It's bootstrapping now. It's editing the agent's MD just to kind of like say the decisions it has made. This is really important because the more we document, the more context it will have in this session. But also, if I close this, all of this remains in my agent's MD for the next session. Okay, now it wants to ask about how the design of that game. Hangman game, I mean, I really don't care. Make your own mind up. Oh, I didn't say please, did I? Oh, well, it's going to take that aggressively. So now it's going to make its own mind up, and it's going to now, once it decides this, it's going to do two things. The first thing it's going to do is create a plan. And the second thing it's going to do is try and create a spec with that plan. Now, the plan, as you saw with some of the previous examples, is a very important thing for the LLM to be able to set out what it wants to do, followed by actually go ahead and execute them. So this is the plan that it just created. It's now, once it's done that, going to go through that every single step and start executing that. One of the things it may do is actually do some research, which is exactly what it's doing now. So it's going back to our knowledge MD. I don't think there's going to be too much knowledge in there that it's going to care about, because I'm not actually building anything in code. I'm not going out to the package registries or anything like that just yet. But what it has done now is it's calling test-will-create. Test-will-create is going to create me my first specification in the specs directory, and it passes a huge amount of information to that, which is basically and essentially all the bootstrapping information that I would have given it, but because this is a demo, asked it to decide. So I'm going to say, yes, create the Hangman specification. Now, if I go right, I think, in this directory, in fact, I'll show you a couple of things. We have this plans, and in this case, it's going to create a Hangman spec. It's going to work on a number of things. It's going to get user feedback, so it's going to ask me about the spec before continuing to build that. It's going to build it, test it, fix it until it's working, and then we can progress and carry on. I now have a specification that's been created, and if I go back, it'll probably say, "Are you happy?" Oh no, it just wants to edit the plan. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's talk about what the specification is. Let's go through this. We have a very interesting first line. Simple CLI Hangman game. Yes, I think I get that. We have a target. Now, the target is either generate or describes. It's very specific to Tesla, this bit, but this is a markdown file that can be used by any agent without Tesla as well. The @generate means from this specification. This specification is a source of truth. From this specification, I can generate source code from it, and Tesla will generate source code from it. That could also be an @describe, so I can create this markdown spec from existing code. If I was in a brownfield project, I could go to code, generate the spec, and this would then be the @describe. The reason it's @describe is because I don't want Tesla to then override the code without me explicitly, adapting that to generate, so that I know that's going to happen. The next thing is capabilities. Essentially a list of things that I want this application to do, followed by the API. And the API is essentially then how I want the application to be used by others. I can at this stage, and dependencies as well. In this case, we're going to be using the readline dependency. It's important to say that when we build, we absolutely make sure that there are no other dependencies in the build that don't exist in this list. We control the dependencies that we pull in, not the LLM. In the capabilities and tests are actually very, very similar. You just need to word it slightly differently, and actually you get a test from it. If I describe exactly what I want this application to do, I should be able to assign test cases to that. Okay, so this has all been done. Oh, has it actually built it? No, it hasn't yet. It's created the Hangman spec. At this point, I can say, spec looks good. Please build. And what Tesla will do at this point is it'll possibly go to the usage specs, look to see if there's, I can't remember was it read file? It'll probably pull down a read file usage spec, and then it'll build. In this case, it's just building. If I cared at this point, I would just say, oh, don't forget to grab that from the usage spec and so forth. There's a bunch I could do with this spec now. I can add tests to the specification. It'll add an @test annotation, and that would also create the test files for me. I can edit the spec at any point using the edit MCP server, or I could ask Claude to do it, or I could just edit it manually. I can generate the actual code, which is what's happening now. I can run the code and I can play with it. I can check all of it back in to a GitHub repo or something like that. Typically, I would check both the code and the spec in, because at this stage they kind of go hand in hand. Another very interesting thing is document. And document is the ability to, when I have an implementation that I'm very, very happy with, it takes a bunch of information from that specific implementation and adds more tests into my specification. So it links the implementation that I'm happy with the specification. That includes things like various regression tests and things like that, but it allows for stable regeneration. And stable regeneration is when I regenerate, or when I rebuild my application, I don't want various things to change and look different. I don't want various things to behave differently. I want there to be some similarity between those generations. So those decisions that are not my high-level decisions that I care about can be added back into the specification, so I get that stable regeneration from version to version. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to, Bolt's still going, excellent. I'm going to jump back here and just talk a little bit about some of the ways in which specifications have I guess, fixed the issues. So the very first one, the collateral damage, well, that gets fixed because we're not just sending a single prompt, we're actually always using the entire spec as context. And as a result, because we have those tests that validate my environment, that validate the code that's generated, we don't break. Okay, we would automatically go around every time. Similarly, we don't forget about previous things that we've said, because it all exists in my specification. Every single part of that is just as important as the next. We try not to hallucinate because we have the right context. We have the usage specs down on our file system, and that is provided as context directly to our agent. So our agent has far less chance of a hallucination or a version blur, because the usage spec version is matched to the actual dependency that we've downloaded. If we're using version 7.0 of Spring in November, well, let's use the version 7.0 usage spec for Spring in November. That way, I don't need my training data to be fully up to date, because I'm using usage information, actual examples, and information about Spring at that version from my usage spec as context. So that kind of like addresses that problem. And finally, yeah, as sessions ends, we can keep the memory. We can store that memory as we wish. We can upload it into our private registries if it's important to us specifically, or we can keep it uploaded into the overall TESL registry if it's an open source library. But we can constantly refer to the same context that we found useful previously. Spec Driven Development. Well, there are a ton of benefits that this could eventually provide us. And really now I'm kind of like looking at things in a much more purist style, where we don't need both the specification and the code together to deliver this solution, but rather where our specifications are so core, they're so key to us as developers, as our source of truth, the code is almost disposable. And once we get to that kind of level, whereby the only thing we're checking in is our specifications and associated non-code artifacts, once we get to that stage, well, actually, when functional changes come in, we can generate, we can reject if that validation isn't successful, and iterate until it is. We can take various pieces of contexts in, based on language, based on ecosystem, a whole bunch of things, to generate us a whole bunch of different flavors of output. We can take in a number of things as context, including various business needs, various policies, maybe even budget constraints. We can personalize what comes out of those specifications. And equally, we don't just need to be thinking about quality tests. We can use security tests and performance tests and other things, including telemetry data from our production environment, using all of these as signals to go back into the context to help with that generation. Of course, we're not there yet. This is a lovely dream, but this is a future, this is a vision which this spec-driven, spec-centric development can lead us to. There are still so many questions that certainly we're looking at and the community are looking at. We feel pretty good with where the spec is, but I'm sure that's going to evolve over time. Validation is a key point, how we debug, how we observe, how we think about adaptable implementations. What is the role of the new developer in this environment? This is a completely new paradigm. This isn't a slight evolution. This is a massive change about the way we do things and will require major changes to things like CI/CD and other things. It's definitely a big challenge. It's something at TESL we're working on, trying to find answers, and not just TESL, but we're working with the wider community. We have a booth downstairs actually, so if you want to help answer those questions or help ask what those questions are, please come find us, and we'd love to chat with you. There is a cool draw happening in 15 minutes. And I'm going to annoy everyone who has signed up by trying to get as many people in this room to click on that QR code, enter a few details, and in 15 minutes you can win one of, 3 things, really. We have this cool Star Wars Lego. We have an AI watcher, both the coolest and creepiest gift there is. And we also have a couple of tickets to our AI Native DevCon conference happening in New York. So if you scan that, add a few details, we're going to be doing the draw at 4 p.m., which I hear is a very favorable time for draws in the expo hall, at 4 p.m. in about 15 minutes. We're also, like I say, trying to build this with the community. We help run a community called the AI Native Dev. There are a number of things that we deliver on this. So there's a podcast, there's a bunch of cool articles, there's an amazing landscape built by Patrick Dubois and others, and also some cool events that we run, community events, as well as I mentioned, an AI Native Dev Con event, which we're running in New York, but there's also a virtual event. This is our 3rd time that we're running it. If you're interested in the virtual event, go to ainativedev.io, and there's a whole bunch of topics in and around AI dev tools, AI dev agents, and spec-driven technologies that I'm sure you'll be interested in. So go to AI Native Dev for that. And finally, and this is probably what I'm going to get in trouble for, given how many people there are here, we have a closed beta program. If you want to try TESL out, feel free. It's completely free. The spec registry is open beta. It's free. This is the QR code to, I've just noticed it says Tesla. Has it been saying Tesla every single time I say TESL? Yeah. Damn. All right, cool. So if you want to try out a nice new Tesla, take a photo of that QR code. You'll join the private beta, and I'll make sure that you get onto that this week. So you'll be able to try that this week, just for folks from Devox. So if you learned something new, and I really hope you did, if you really enjoyed this session, you are absolutely right. Please go ahead and review that in Stefan's very nicely vibe-coded app. Thank you very much. I think I have about 3 minutes for questions, if there are any questions. Otherwise, yes. Slides, yeah, I can make them available for sure. Let me think. Is there a way I can make that available through the Devox site? In the app? In the app, I'll make it available in the app, yeah. Yes? How does something like this compare to context? The question is, how does something like this compare to Context 7? There's a few ways. Context 7 is great as well. There's a few ways it can compare to Context 7. One is Context 7 is very focused on documentation. The way we generate these usage specs is from code as well as other things. So we make sure that we're actually looking at the exact code that's in your environment, not potentially stale docs and things like that. Another way, we also do private registries, and we can go beyond just libraries. So we can, like I say, do a ton of other stuff like your style, your any policies, any organizational ways in which you wish to do that as well. So there's a few differences, but yeah, Context 7 is a great solution as well. Yes? Yeah, great question. The question is, how does it scale with monorepos and as things get bigger? So a really big important thing is kind of like hypermodularity for us. So it's really important that when you build your specs, you think about it and you architect it in a way that makes sense for the size of that spec. It's a little bit similar, I think, when we develop code, we think about packages, we think about how big it makes sense to create these Java files and things like that. It's going to be similar as we go ahead and learn this with specifications to make sure they're the right size, they group well. And ultimately, in terms of scaling with things like monorepos, you can do that in a couple of ways. You can either use Tessel at the root directory, or you can use it in each of those other directories. I've not had a huge amount of experience with Tessel in monorepos, so try it out and see what works best. I think a couple of people in our Discord, they are using it, I think, inside every mini repo, I guess, inside the directories of their monorepo. But yeah, great question. Any other questions? Sorry if I can't see your hand up. It's extremely bright here. Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming here.